October 1943. A convent in occupied Holland. When SS Unterscharführer Ludolf Brenner kicked open the heavy wooden doors, he expected fear. What he got instead was a question that would haunt him forever. Sister Hildegund Benedicta, standing in the candlelit chapel with two Jewish children clutching her habit, looked straight into his eyes and asked, "Does your mother know you do this?" The autumn rain hammered against the cobblestones of Utrecht as 3 military vehicles rolled through the narrow streets toward the convent of Santa Clara. Inside the lead car, SS Unterscharführer Ludolf Brenner checked his Luger for the 3rd time. At 22, he had been in the SS for only 18 months, but his superiors had noticed his efficiency. This raid would be simple. Intelligence reported that the nuns were hiding Jews and resistance members. His orders were clear: search, arrest, transport. Ludolf had grown up in a small Bavarian village where his mother lit candles every Sunday at St. Michael's Church. She had cried when he joined the SS, but his father had been proud. The Reich needed strong young men, his father had said, men willing to do what was necessary for Germany's future. Ludolf had believed it then. He still believed it now, or at least he told himself he did. The convoy stopped outside the convent's iron gates. SS Hauptsturmführer Reinhard Kempf stepped out first, his face carved from stone, his eyes empty of anything resembling doubt. Kempf had overseen dozens of these operations. To him, nuns were no different from any other enemy of the Reich. Traitors wore many faces. He had personally supervised the arrests of clergy in Poland, France, and now Holland. Each time he felt nothing. No hesitation. No second thoughts. The Reich's enemies came in all forms, and sentiment was a weakness that got soldiers killed. Kempf had learned that lesson early, in the blood-soaked fields of the Eastern Front, where mercy meant death and brutality meant survival. "Brenner," Kempf barked, his voice cutting through the sound of rain and idling engines. "You take the chapel and the eastern wing. I want every room searched, every closet, every cellar corner. If they are hiding anyone, I want them found within the hour. Do you understand?" "Jawohl, Hauptsturmführer," Ludolf replied, snapping to attention, his boots clicking together with practiced precision. His heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his face neutral, emotionless. That was what they had taught him at the SS training facility in Bad Tölz. Emotion was weakness. Duty was everything. The individual meant nothing compared to the greater good of the Reich. The gates were locked, but that lasted only as long as it took for 2 soldiers to break the chain with bolt cutters. The metal shrieked as it gave way, the sound echoing off the wet stone walls of the convent. The nuns had heard them coming. Of course they had. The engines, the boots, the shouted commands. There was no element of surprise in Nazi terror. Terror worked best when it announced itself, when it gave its victims time to feel the approaching doom, to understand that resistance was futile, that the machinery of the Reich was inevitable and unstoppable. Sister Hildegund Benedicta had been expecting this day for 2 years. Ever since the first Jewish family had knocked on the convent door in the dead of night, begging for sanctuary. She had opened that door herself, seen the fear in their eyes, the exhaustion in their bodies, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would help them. Mother Superior Walburga had not hesitated. "We serve Christ," she had said simply, her voice calm and certain. "And Christ was clear about welcoming the stranger. We will help them." Since then, the convent of Santa Clara had become a way station on the Underground Railroad that moved Jews, resistance fighters, and Allied pilots out of occupied Holland. 16 children had passed through their doors. 8 had made it to safety, spirited away in the night to farms and safe houses and eventually to neutral Switzerland. 8 remained, hidden in a false-walled section of the cellar that the nuns had constructed themselves, working in shifts through the night, their hands bleeding from the rough wood and stone. But Miriam and Ephraim Leventhal were not in the cellar. The 6-year-old boy had developed a fever that morning, his small body burning with heat, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Sister Hildegund had brought him and his 8-year-old sister to the small infirmary off the chapel, where she could monitor him, where she could bathe his forehead with cool water and whisper prayers over his restless sleep. When she heard the vehicles, the shouting, the crash of the gates, she knew there was no time to move them. The cellar was too far. The soldiers would be inside within seconds, so she made a choice. She brought them into the chapel itself, draped them in spare habits that hung loose on their small frames, and told them to kneel and pray. "Do not look up," she whispered urgently, her hands on their shoulders. "No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, Keep your eyes on the cross. Do not move. Do not speak. Pray with all your heart, and God will protect you." Miriam, her dark eyes wide with terror, nodded silently. Ephraim, too weak to do more than whimper, simply pressed his face to the cold stone floor. Sister Hildegund positioned herself in front of them, her body a shield, her presence a statement. If they came for the children, they would have to go through her first. The chapel doors exploded inward with a crash that echoed off the vaulted ceiling like thunder. Ancient hinges forged centuries ago by craftsmen who had believed they were building something sacred, something that would endure, gave way under the force of military boots. Ludolf entered first, his Luger drawn, his hand steady despite the chaos in his mind. His heart pounded in a way it had not pounded since his first combat action in Poland, when he had watched a village burn and told himself it was necessary, that this was war, that the enemy had brought this upon themselves. But this was not combat. These were nuns, old women in black habits kneeling in prayer. And yet, his hand trembled slightly on the grip of his pistol, a tremor so small that no one else would notice, but he felt it like an earthquake. Sister Hildegund stood slowly, deliberately, her movements calm and measured. She was 43 years old, her face lined from years of prayer and service, but her eyes were clear and steady. Behind her, Miriam and Ephraim knelt perfectly still, their small bodies hidden beneath oversized habits, their faces pressed to the cold stone floor, their prayers silent and desperate. Around the chapel, a dozen other nuns remained kneeling, their lips moving in silent prayer, their hands clasped, their bodies radiating a kind of peace that seemed impossible in the face of armed men and shouted threats. Ludolf's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail with the trained precision of an SS officer. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his gut, in the way the air seemed too still, too heavy. The nuns were too composed. He had seen fear before. He had seen it in the eyes of Jews rounded up from their homes, in the faces of resistance fighters dragged from hiding places, in the trembling hands of mothers clutching their children. He had seen defiance too, the kind of angry, futile resistance that ended in blood and broken bones. This was neither. This was something else, something that unsettled him in a way he could not name, could not categorize, could not file away in the neat mental boxes that allowed him to do his job, without thinking too hard about what it meant. "You are harboring enemies of the Reich," Ludolf said, his voice louder than it needed to be, compensating for the uncertainty he felt, the doubt that gnawed at the edges of his carefully constructed identity. "We have intelligence that Jews and resistance members are hidden in this convent. You will cooperate with our search, or you will be arrested for treason against the German Reich and the Führer." Sister Hildegund took a single step forward, her eyes, pale blue and steady as a winter sky, locked onto Ludolf's. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain continued its assault on the stained glass windows, each drop a tiny percussion against images of saints and martyrs who had died for their faith centuries ago. The candles flickered in the draught from the broken doors, their flames dancing like spirits, and in that silence, Ludolf felt something crack inside him, a fissure in the armor he had built around his conscience. "Does your mother know you do this?" Sister Hildegund asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried through the chapel like a bell. The question landed like a physical blow. Ludolf's breath caught in his throat. His hand, still holding the Luger, dropped slightly. For a moment he was not SS Unterscharführer Ludolf Brenner, decorated officer of the Third Reich, loyal servant of the Führer. He was a boy in a Bavarian church, kneeling beside his mother, her hand warm on his shoulder, her voice soft as she taught him the Lord's Prayer. He was a boy who had once believed that goodness and strength were the same thing, that serving God and serving one's country were not in conflict, that the world was a place where right and wrong were clear and distinct. "What?" he managed, his voice barely a whisper, the word escaping before he could stop it. "Your mother," Sister Hildegund repeated, her tone gentle but unyielding, like a teacher correcting a student who should know better. "Does she know that you break into houses of God with guns? That you threaten women who have taken vows of peace? That you hunt children like animals? Does she know what you have become?" Ludolf's face flushed red, heat rising from his collar to his cheeks. Anger surged through him, hot and defensive, a familiar emotion that was easier to feel than the shame that lurked beneath it. "I serve the Reich," he snapped, his voice sharp and brittle. "I do my duty. My mother understands sacrifice. She understands that Germany must be strong, that we must eliminate our enemies, that weakness leads to destruction. Does she understand this? Sister Hildegund gestured to the chapel, to the nuns still kneeling in prayer, to the children hidden among them, to the broken doors, and the armed men and the machinery of violence that had invaded this sacred space. Does she understand that her son has become the kind of man who would drag children from their beds and send them to their deaths? Does she know that you have traded your soul for a uniform? I do not, Ludolf started, but his voice faltered, the words dying in his throat. Because he did. He knew exactly what happened to the Jews they arrested. Everyone knew, even if no one spoke of it openly, even if the official reports used euphemisms like resettlement and special treatment. The trains, the camps, the smoke that rose from chimneys in places whose names were whispered like curses: Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau. The list grew longer every month, a geography of horror that stretched across occupied Europe. He had heard the rumors. He had seen the empty ghettos, the abandoned homes still set with dishes on tables, toys scattered on floors, lives interrupted mid-sentence. He had seen the trains packed with human cargo, faces pressed against the slats, hands reaching through the gaps, voices crying for water, for mercy, for God. Kempf's voice cut through the chapel like a whip crack. Brenner, what is the delay? Arrest her and continue the search. We do not have time for philosophical discussions with traitors. Ludolf turned to see his superior standing in the doorway, his face twisted with impatience and contempt. Kempf strode forward, his boots echoing on the stone floor, and grabbed Sister Hildegund by the arm with brutal efficiency. You will come with us. All of you. This entire convent is under arrest for crimes against the Reich, for harboring enemies of the state, for treason. Mother Superior Walburga rose from her place at the front of the chapel. At 60, she moved slowly, her joints stiff from years of kneeling in prayer, but her voice was iron, forged in decades of faith and service. We have committed no crimes. We have obeyed the laws of God, which stand above the laws of men, above the laws of tyrants, above the laws of empires that rise and fall like grass in the field. Your God has no authority here, Kempf snarled, his face inches from hers. Your God is a fairy tale for the weak and the foolish. The only authority here is the Reich, and the Reich has judged you guilty. He turned to the soldiers behind him, his voice rising to a shout. Search every room. Tear this place apart if you have to. Check the walls for hidden spaces, check the floors, check the ceilings, and take these women to the trucks, all of them. The next hour was chaos. Soldiers swarmed through the convent like locusts, overturning beds, smashing furniture, ripping paintings from walls, tearing books from shelves. They moved through the building with systematic brutality, their training evident in the efficiency of their destruction. In the kitchen, they dumped flour and sugar on the floor, kicked over barrels of water, smashed jars of preserves that the nuns had spent months preparing. In the library, they threw centuries-old manuscripts into piles, their pages fluttering like wounded birds. In the chapel, they overturned the altar, scattering the communion vessels, trampling the sacred hosts underfoot. In the cellar, they found the false wall. It took them 20 minutes of searching, tapping on stones, listening for hollow sounds, but they found it. They found the 8 children huddled in the darkness, their eyes wide with terror, their bodies pressed together for warmth and comfort. They found the forged documents that would have given them new identities, new lives, new chances. They found the hidden food supplies, the blankets, the small toys that the nuns had collected to give the children some semblance of normalcy. They found the maps marked with escape routes, the addresses of safe houses, the names of contacts in the resistance. They found everything. Sister Hildegund and Mother Superior Walburga were dragged to the trucks along with 6 other nuns, their hands bound with rough rope that cut into their wrists. The children were separated, pulled away from the women who had protected them, their cries piercing the rain-soaked air like knife wounds. Miriam screamed for Sister Hildegund, her voice breaking with terror and betrayal. Ephraim, feverish and weak, simply wept, his small body shaking with sobs. The other children from the cellar were herded into a separate truck, their faces pale and shocked, their eyes searching for some adult who could tell them this was a mistake, that everything would be all right, that they would be safe. Ludolf stood in the courtyard, watching it all unfold, and felt nothing. Or rather, he felt too much, and so he shut it down, locked it away in the dark place where he kept all the things he could not afford to think about. He became the soldier he was supposed to be, the instrument of the Reich's will, the man who followed orders without question because questioning led to doubt, and doubt led to weakness, and weakness led to death. But Sister Hildegund's question echoed in his mind, relentless and unforgiving, a voice he could not silence no matter how hard he tried. Does your mother know you do this? The trucks rolled away from the convent of Santa Clara as the rain turned to sleet, the temperature dropping, the world turning gray and cold. Inside one of them, Sister Hildegund sat with her hands bound, surrounded by the children she had tried to save, her body swaying with the movement of the vehicle. She did not cry. She did not rage against the injustice, did not curse her captors, did not beg for mercy. She prayed, not for herself, but for the young man with the gun who had looked at her with his mother's eyes, who had, for just a moment, seemed to see what he had become and been horrified by it. The trucks drove through the streets of Utrecht, past houses where people hid behind curtains, watching but not intervening, knowing that to help was to die, that the machinery of occupation ground up heroes and bystanders alike. They drove past churches whose bells had been silenced, past schools that now taught the glories of the Reich, past shops marked with signs that read, Juden verboten. They drove through a city that had learned to look away, to survive by not seeing, by not knowing, by telling themselves that what happened to others could not happen to them if they just kept their heads down and followed the rules. 3 weeks later, Sister Hildegund Benedicta and Mother Superior Walburga were transported to Ravensbrück concentration camp, the main camp for women in the Nazi system. They traveled in cattle cars packed so tightly that standing was the only option, the air thick with the smell of sweat and fear and human waste. The journey took 2 days. Some women died standing up, their bodies held upright by the press of other bodies, discovered only when the doors opened and they fell out onto the platform like broken dolls. Ravensbrück was a world unto itself, a universe where the normal rules of humanity had been suspended, where survival was measured in days, and hope was a luxury no one could afford. Sister Hildegund was assigned to the textile workshop, where prisoners worked 12-hour shifts sewing uniforms for the Wehrmacht. Mother Superior Walburga, too old for heavy labor, was sent to the punishment block, where the elderly and the sick were left to die slowly from neglect and starvation. Sister Hildegund lasted 3 months. She shared her meager rations with weaker prisoners, sang hymns in the barracks at night when the guards were not listening, organized secret prayer circles that gave women a reason to survive one more day. She contracted typhus in December, the disease spreading through the camp like wildfire, and died in January 1944, her body thrown into a mass grave with dozens of others, her name recorded in a ledger that would later be burned as the Nazis tried to destroy evidence of their crimes. Mother Superior Walburga survived until April 1945, dying just days before the camp's liberation by Soviet forces. She had endured 16 months of hell, her body wasted to nothing, her spirit somehow intact. Other prisoners who survived remembered her as the woman who never stopped praying, who blessed everyone she met, who forgave her captors even as they beat her. When she died, the women in her barracks wept, and they buried her in a corner of the camp with a wooden cross they had carved in secret, marking her grave so that someday someone might remember. Of the 8 children found in the cellar, none survived the war. They were sent to Westerbork transit camp in the northeastern Netherlands, a way station on the road to death. From there they were loaded onto trains bound for Sobibor extermination camp in occupied Poland. They arrived at night, the platform lit by harsh floodlights, dogs barking, guards shouting. They were told they were going to shower, to be deloused, to be registered. They were herded into buildings disguised as bathhouses. The doors were sealed. The gas was released. Within 20 minutes they were dead. Their bodies were burned in outdoor pits, their ashes scattered in the forest, their names added to the millions who vanished without trace, without grave, without memory, except for the records kept by their murderers. Miriam and Ephraim Leventhal were murdered together, their small hands clutched tight as the gas filled their lungs. Ephraim's fever had broken during the journey, and he had looked up at his sister with hope in his eyes, asking if they would see Sister Hildegund again, if they would go back to the convent where they had been safe. Miriam had lied to him, told him yes, told him everything would be all right, told him to close his eyes and think of the prayers Sister Hildegund had taught them. They died believing that someone, somewhere, still cared about them. It was a small mercy in a world that offered none. Sister Adeltraud, the youngest nun at 26, had been away from the convent that day, delivering medicine to a nearby village where a family was sick with influenza. She had left early in the morning, before the trucks arrived, before the doors were broken, before her world ended. She returned in the late afternoon to find the gates hanging open, the doors splintered, the chapel desecrated. The altar was overturned, the communion vessels scattered, the candles extinguished. She walked through the empty halls, calling names that no one answered, her voice echoing in the silence. She found a note hidden in the chapel, tucked behind a loose stone in the wall where the nuns had kept their most important documents. It was in Mother Superior Walburga's handwriting, written in haste but with steady hand. They have come for us. We go willingly as Christ went to his cross. Do not mourn us. Continue the work. Remember the children. Tell the world what happened here. Bear witness. Sister Adeltraud clutched the note to her chest and wept, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. She survived the war by going underground, joining the resistance, using her knowledge of the convent's network to help others escape. She carried forged documents, guided families through the night to safe houses, risked her life 100 times because she could not bear to do nothing, could not bear to let her sister's sacrifice be meaningless. When the war ended, and the camps were liberated and the full horror of what had happened became known, she dedicated her life to documentation. She tracked down survivors, recorded testimonies, gathered evidence. She wrote letters to archives and museums and government offices, demanding that the story of the convent of Santa Clara be remembered, that the names of her sisters be recorded, that their courage be honored. She lived until 1987, dying at the age of 70, her life's work complete. She had published 3 books about the convent and the resistance, had given hundreds of interviews, had testified at war crimes trials. She had ensured that Sister Hildegund Benedicta, Mother Superior Walburga, and the 6 other nuns who died at Ravensbrück would not be forgotten, that their names would be carved in stone at memorials, that their story would be taught to children who had never known war, who could not imagine a world where nuns were arrested, and children were murdered for the crime of existing. As for SS Unterscharführer Ludolf Brenner, he continued his service until the end of the war. He was promoted twice, commended for his efficiency, assigned to increasingly important operations. He participated in raids across Holland, Belgium, and France. He arrested hundreds of people, Jews and resistance fighters and ordinary citizens, who had made the mistake of helping the wrong person or saying the wrong thing. He told himself he was doing his duty, that he was serving his country, that history would vindicate him. He buried Sister Hildegund's question deep in his mind, locked it away where it could not touch him, could not make him doubt, could not make him human. But the question did not die. It waited. It grew. It festered like a wound that never healed. In the final months of the war, as the Reich collapsed and the armies retreated and the truth of the camps became undeniable, Ludolf began to dream. He dreamed of the chapel in Utrecht, of the nuns kneeling in prayer, of the children hidden beneath oversized habits. He dreamed of Sister Hildegund's eyes, pale blue and steady, looking at him with something that was not hatred, but something worse, something like pity. He woke in the night gasping for air, his body drenched in sweat, the question echoing in his mind. Does your mother know you do this? He was captured by American forces in May 1945, found hiding in a farmhouse in Bavaria, his uniform discarded, his papers burned, his identity denied. But the Allies had lists, photographs, testimonies from survivors who remembered faces and names. He was identified, arrested, held in a POW camp for 2 years while investigators built cases against thousands of former SS officers. In the end, there was not enough evidence to charge him with specific war crimes. He had followed orders. He had been efficient, but not unusually brutal. He had not personally killed anyone, had not operated a gas chamber, had not conducted medical experiments. He was one of thousands of men who had made the machinery work, but could not be directly linked to its worst atrocities. He was released in 1947 and returned to his village in Bavaria. His mother had died in 1944, her heart giving out during an Allied bombing raid. His father had been killed on the Eastern Front in 1943. The house he had grown up in was a ruin. Its roof collapsed, its walls pockmarked with shrapnel. He rebuilt it slowly, working with his hands, trying to create something instead of destroy, trying to atone in the only way he knew how. But the village remembered. They knew what he had been, what he had done. Children crossed the street when they saw him coming. Women clutched their shopping bags and hurried past. Men who had fought in the Wehrmacht and come home with wounds and medals refused to speak to him, because there was a difference between being a soldier and being SS, a difference between fighting a war and hunting children. He was tolerated but not accepted, allowed to exist but not to belong. He never married. He never had children. He worked as a laborer, doing odd jobs, repairing fences and roofs, asking for nothing more than enough money to buy food and keep the house standing. He went to church every Sunday, sitting in the back pew, never taking communion, never speaking to the priest. He prayed, but his prayers felt hollow, words spoken into a void that did not answer. In 1963, on a cold October morning, exactly 20 years after the raid on the convent of Santa Clara, Ludolf Brenner walked into the forest behind his house. He carried a rope and a letter. The letter was addressed to no one in particular, and it contained only one sentence written in careful script. "My mother did not know, and I am grateful for that mercy." He hanged himself from an oak tree, his body found 3 days later by a hunter who recognized him and felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, only a grim sense that justice, delayed but inevitable, had finally arrived. Sister Adeltraud, who had dedicated her life to preserving the memory of her fallen sisters, heard of his death through the network of survivors and witnesses she had built over the decades. She did not celebrate it. She did not mourn it. She simply added his name to the long list of those destroyed by the war, perpetrators and victims alike, all of them caught in a machinery of evil that consumed everything it touched. She wrote in her journal that night, "Another soul lost, another life wasted, another mother's son destroyed by the lie that obedience is virtue and cruelty is strength. May God have mercy on him, because I cannot." The question Sister Hildegund had asked that rainy October day in 1943 had no answer. Or rather, it had too many answers, none of them sufficient, none of them satisfying. Does your mother know you do this? It was a question about conscience, about the distance between who we are raised to be and who we become, about the moment when we choose to serve evil, even when we know better, especially when we know better. It was a question about the ordinary men who did extraordinary evil, who went home to their families and kissed their children, and slept soundly because they had convinced themselves that following orders absolved them of responsibility, that being a cog in the machine meant they were not accountable for what the machine produced. History records the names of those who resisted. Edith Stein, born Jewish, converted to Catholicism, became a Carmelite nun, arrested by the Gestapo in 1942 from her convent in the Netherlands, transported to Auschwitz, murdered in the gas chambers because her faith could not erase her heritage in the eyes of those who saw only race. Maximilian Kolbe, Franciscan friar, arrested for hiding Jews in his monastery, sent to Auschwitz, volunteered to die in place of a stranger, starved to death in a bunker, canonized as a saint. Bernhard Lichtenberg, Catholic priest in Berlin, prayed publicly for Jews every night, arrested, died on the way to Dachau. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Lutheran pastor, joined the resistance, executed weeks before the war ended. The list goes on, a litany of courage in the face of horror, of people who chose faith over safety, compassion over compliance. They stood in the path of the machinery and said no, and the machinery crushed them. But their questions remain. Does your mother know you do this? Do you know what you do? Can you live with what you have become? Can you look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person staring back? Can you justify your actions to the God you claim to serve, to the values you claim to uphold, to the children who will one day ask what you did when evil walked the earth in uniform and demanded obedience? These are not questions for the past alone. They are questions for every generation, every person who must choose between the easy path of obedience and the hard path of conscience. They are questions that echo through history, from the killing fields of Cambodia to the genocide in Rwanda, from the disappeared in Argentina to the ethnic cleansing in the Balkans, from the internment camps to the border detention centers. They are questions that ask us to look honestly at the systems we serve, the orders we follow, the injustices we tolerate because speaking out is inconvenient or dangerous or unpopular. Sister Hildegund Benedicta died in a concentration camp, her body thrown into a mass grave, her name nearly lost to history. But her question survived. It survived in the testimony of Sister Adeltraud, in the archives of resistance movements, in the memorials built to honor those who chose courage over cowardice. It survived because it is a question that every generation must answer for itself, a question that never stops being relevant, never stops demanding a response. It is a question that challenges us to be better than we are, to resist the comfortable lie that we are just following orders, just doing our jobs, just trying to survive. It is a question that insists we are responsible for our choices, that we cannot hide behind uniforms or ideologies, or the excuse that everyone else was doing it too. It is a question that demands we look at the faces of those we harm and see them as human, as someone's child, as someone's mother, as someone who matters. Does your mother know you do this? Would she be proud, or would she weep? If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from history. Leave a comment below telling us what you think, and hit that like button to help spread these important stories. Thank you for watching.